Welcome to Almost Here, Round the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies poised to transform our lives for better or worse are the focus of this podcast. Almost here means these technologies are now here and starting to be used, or just around the corner, from Bitcoin to artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. My guest is Adam Kujawa. He's the Director of Malware Intelligence at Malwarebytes. And the website is also malwarebytes.com. And Bytes has a Adam, thanks for coming. How you doing?
I'm great, Rich. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was just saying offline, unlike, I thought of Malwarebytes as a snack, but it's not. Obviously it's not malware. So we were laughing about that.
I'm really going to pitch that, though.
Yeah, why not? It could be a breakfast cereal and a cyber thing. So tell me about the company. What do you guys work on? What's the premise of everything you do?
Yeah, sure thing. So Malwarebytes is we're a security solution company. We developed anti-malware and additional software, I guess layered defense software for both consumers and for enterprises. So we're kind of like a next generation antivirus in that sense, where we go after malware. We use lots of different technologies that we have at our disposal in order to detect malware and attacks and things like that, with the hope of overall just kind of creating a malware-free existence for at least our customers, if not the world.
I know it's an arms race. I mean, is it even possible to do that? What's the environment like out there? How many bad actors are there, and how many viruses and Trojans and all that stuff do you have to contend with?
There's a lot. And I mean, over the last 10 years, the numbers have increased drastically. We've probably never seen more new malware than we see now. And the people that are involved in it, there's far more folks. The actual act of being a cyber criminal is a lot easier now, because you've got a lot of darknet forums and hacker, websites and forums where people are either sharing how to do these things or offering their services as a paid consultant or basically, as a service. So we use a term in the industry a lot. And I know it's a term in the tech industry overall, but the as a service thing, they think of like security as a service as being a type of offering that you could, easily deploy quickly and take care of your problems. There's not a lot of setup, things like that. When it comes to certain malware types as a service, like for instance, ransomware as a service, and ransomware is the type of malware that's going to hijack the user system, encrypt all their files, and then demand payment for it. So when I talk about ransomware as a service, then I'm talking about, well, there's a family of ransomware out there. There's the creators, these developers, these bad guys who are selling the use of their ransomware that they've spent hours and hours and hours on developing and making it as powerful as possible. And now they're going to let other people distribute it for them, and they're going to take a cut of that. So it's basically at the point where you don't have to know much to be a cyber criminal. You just have to have resources and know where to go, know who to talk to.
What's the umbrella term? Is it viruses and malware as a subset, or is it malware and viruses and phishing and all this other stuff's a subset?
So
hierarchy of terms.
Right. Well, I mean, overall, the highest all-encompassing umbrella term is just cybercrime, which would be malware and phishing and various types of other, or being the encompassing term for viruses, Trojans, ransomware, adware, actual software that's on the system doing bad things, hacker tools, things like that.
Gotcha. So what's, how long have you been in this? And, I'm guessing it's X number of years. And what's the latest trends that you're seeing that are different from before?
Well, I've been at this for 14 plus years now, and with Malwarebytes for about 7. And I mean, my background is in I used to work for the military, for the government, certain 3-letter agencies doing kind of similar work and fighting badness behind the scenes. But as far as trends go, I mean, the landscape changes pretty much every 6 months. Well, we are doing this regular thing we call the Cybercrime Tactics and Techniques Report, and we do this every single quarter. We're on our 8th one right now. Either 6th or 8th. I lose count. But regardless, we take a look at the last 3 months and we say, all right, what happened out there? What are the trends? What are our customers seeing. We look at our detection telemetry we get to see what kind of stuff that our customers are getting hit with. We have various honeypots and collection systems we use to identify what the bad guys are going to be looking or going to be trying to push out. And so we combine, both of those kind of sources of information with the experience and knowledge of our analysts and our researchers, and are able to create this really great report that just gives a little update as far as what the threat landscape is doing and if it's interesting or not. This year in particular has been a little bit boring, especially the first half of the year, because late in 2017, the value of Bitcoin, jumped through the roof. You wrote a book about it. And when that happened, we started seeing cyber criminals distributing crypto miners all over the place.
That's right. Yeah, to browsers.
Buy ones. Yeah. And then also just actually on the desktop as well. So a lot of the same avenues we see for distribution of other types of malware, for instance, like ransomware, Trojans and things, we see Bitcoin miners, or we saw Bitcoin miners for a long time. It was so heavily detected that there was very little other malware going on. And that's changed now. As of Q3, that has definitely changed. We're actually seeing a significant drop in crypto mining activity. My personal theory being that it's just not worth it anymore to the bad guys.
Yep.
It's not a good return on investment.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, I don't know, anything that you can say, any crazy stories of like unbelievably sophisticated malware you've run into, or just, real nasty or really interesting tactics that, cyber criminals have used that you had to defend against?
Sure. So one example that, it's a pretty big name example with WannaCry last year, May of last year. So we have anti-ransomware technology built into our products, and this basically allows, or it keeps an eye on every process and every thread on an operating system or inside of Windows. What's going on in the system? Who's talking to who's communicating with what? And we use that to keep track of all operations going on, and then identify certain operations as being known to be malicious or known to be associated with ransomware. We kind of give a score to each of those operations, and when a particular process starts to get a pretty high score because they're doing so many things we recognize as ransomware, then we identify the offending executable, we kill it, we go back to we try to find the originating evil. So if the malware infects the system, it will probably try to infect a separate process, or at least the memory of that process, and appear to be that process doing something malicious on the system in order to kind of hide itself. So we try to find that originating file, we delete that too. And so the point of all that was that in May of last year, when WannaCry hit, we were able to grab that stuff and stop it before we had even needed to see it. I mean, this is the future of security here when it comes to behavioral detection, when it comes to artificial intelligence and being able to do things based on the behavior versus on what it looks like or what the file itself looks like. So, that's a good example. I got a scary one. So this was years ago, and this was back before CryptoLocker came along. So before the days of encrypting ransomware were all over the place. Most of the ransomware we were dealing with, this is like 2012, was just these lockers that would just lock your screen, say we're from the FBI or Interpol or wherever, and you've committed a crime, pay us to expunge your record or whatever. And I don't know if you remember this. Yeah. So a lot of people got hit. And the tactics of them started to get more and more kind of ruthless when more and more people were like, oh, this is totally fake. I can easily get this off my system. It was pretty rampant there for a while because it was being distributed through exploit kits. But near the end, before we kind of saw a complete drop off of this method of attack because it was no longer as effective. There was one particular ransomware family that would lock the screen, that would claim you've been doing things like illegal gambling or whatever, but then also like looking at, observing, saving child pornography. And the worst part about this was that this ransomware claimed that they found it, and they had a little image at the very bottom of the lock screen that was child pornography. Yeah, so at this point, if you're a person that doesn't know anything about computers, or you're not, a security buff or anything like that, you see something like that in your system, what are you going to do? Are you going to go? Yeah, are you going to go to your friend or your Geek SWAT or somebody else who says, "Oh, it looks like you were looking at child porn here," but even though you weren't, It's the guilt
Right.
that the cyber criminals give to the user, and then they say, "Oh, I'll just pay it; it'll go away."
That's horrible.
So, yeah, that's one of the nastier ones I've seen.
Do you? I would figure you guys have a sandbox environment, maybe like a network of computers that you don't put any viruses or don't put any anti-malware on, and then expose it to the internet and see what happens to it, right?
Yeah. We call that various stage execution of malware. Our kind of first stage analysis in that kind of environment would be to just kind of identify everything about the file, about the malware itself, see what it does, what kind of operations it changes on the system. That information is valuable for our analysts. It's valuable for us to do deeper analysis and write blog posts and do whatever we have to do to make the product better at protecting folks against that threat. Second stage analysis would be to let that malware also download additional malware and then see what that does. And that's kind of the holy grail of the security community right now, getting to that point where you've got a sandbox that just completely leads the malware from initial infection all the way to double, triple, whatever other infection level it wants to get to at the very end of its infection cycle. And so this allows us to get us lots and lots of information. The problem, of course, being that the bad guys know we do this, and they make their malware to stop our analysis. It'll detect, oh, I'm inside of a virtual machine or a sandbox or something. Oh, I'm being analyzed. This is not, this isn't the right memory space I'm supposed to be in. Things like that. Even time checks sometimes inside of a virtual environment. The time isn't necessarily exactly the same. So doing a time check, especially when you're doing some sort of analysis like that, is a good idea.
That's crazy. So the countermeasures are they can tell when you're trying to scan or I guess they would look at a normal computer environment would be used by users. And the users, I guess, would have a certain profile and open certain, I don't know, they'd have certain settings or open certain programs and use it at a certain frequency level. So maybe they analyze all that. I don't know.
Yeah, they have to, and there's one particular method I always really liked. I think it's called I can't remember what it's called right now. Regardless, the malware tries to throw a call to a function at the very low level assembly programming level of a virtual machine. Okay, so every virtual machine kind of runs its own secret, own private processor that has its own ability to take its own commands, its own language, things like that. It won't be the exact same as the processor you're running on your desktop. So what the malware will do is, if it knows it's in, for instance, VirtualBox, runs its own processor, has its own language and code that's pretty similar to what you see with outside of a virtual machine, but within it does have a few extra commands to make it, the virtual machine do whatever it wants to do. So the bad guys know about this, and they say, all right, look, I'm going to make this call. I'm going to call this function that should only exist inside of a virtual machine. If it returns, then I'm killing everything because I'm inside a virtual machine. If it doesn't, then I'm going to crash the malware. But then, it's very complicated. But basically, they're going to infect the system, and we have to model our sandboxes and our analysis environments after kind of a traditional user environment. Sometimes we have to make the mouse move a little bit. Sometimes we put a bunch of documents on the desktop. We try to make it look as legitimate as possible, so it's not a dead giveaway that we're the good guys trying to fight them.
Yeah, interesting. Do you have a bug bounty program, or do you have a come at me bro type program where you invite hackers to try to crack your software? And I would figure, I know that it seems like hackers just want money. So if you offer them a decent incentive, I would think that would make a lot of them, attack you in a certain environment and help you get rid of bugs.
Yeah, and we do have a bug bounty program. We work with a third party actually for our bug bounty program so that people, researchers or cyber criminals or whoever wants to poke at our stuff can submit that kind of information to us, and they can get a payout for it. So we don't go out and say, hey, all the hackers of the world try to take us down, because you can't take us down. It's impossible. We're not dumb. But we do have a bug bounty program, and we've had a few instances where it's come really in handy.
Okay, yeah, interesting. What about what are some common misconceptions? Like, I don't know. When I think of smartphones, it seems like, I don't know. Again, I'm just one person, but I don't hear about many viruses or malware on smartphones. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's the worst environment. Like, how would you compare mobile to desktop, and what's the landscape look like?
If I was to rank, at least where we have offerings, the kind of operating systems or platforms that would be the most susceptible to malware, number one would be Windows. Number two would be Android. Number three would be Mac. And then we haven't really seen very much at all for iOS. That is a pretty locked down environment. I got to give it credit. I'm an Android person myself, but so anyway, we do see a fair amount of attacks coming through on the Android side. Everything from ransomware, hijacking to information stealing malware. It's not as common as we see on the Windows desktop side, mainly because there's a lot of different platforms. Everybody's running a different version of the Android OS. It's not the best platform. It takes a bit more effort, cunning, cleverness, basically, to try and to get a user to click on something that will allow the malware to have administrative access. That's another thing you've got, that a lot of these phones are locked down to the point where even our app, because we've got an app for smartphones for Android and iOS coming out. The Android's been out for years, and there's always limits as to how we can scan APKs, potentially malicious files on the phone. On the desktop, we have full administrative power. We can do whatever we want in order to really take a deep look. But on the Android side, doing that kind of stuff isn't something that that Google allows, the Android apps to do to each other, to be able to dig into it and say, what is this? Who are you? What are you doing? And it does that for security purposes, but obviously it makes it more difficult for both the protectors and the attackers to really secure everything. So most of what you see on the Android side is social engineering, is ad-based, comes because somebody installed an app from a third-party app store that's untrusted instead of Google Play or whatever. So that's mostly what we see on the Android side. And we've been talking for years about, the day where Android malware rules the world is coming, but it never came, and it still isn't there yet. When we get mobile phones that are as powerful as desktops and that have maybe as lack security as a desktop might have, then we may see a bigger push in that direction. But yeah, right now it's still almost entirely on the Windows side.
Yeah, that's weird because mobile is now I guess the threshold has been crossed where mobile is in use more than desktop and laptop, and I would think the hackers go where the money is. So,
well, that's why you see
what's happening with mobile.
Do
you see it becoming a big source of viruses and malware in the future?
Well, the bad guys go after the money, that's for sure, but they also are lazy. A lot of them are. They look for the low-hanging fruit. And like I said, the Android environment is just too much of a pain right now to get a good return on investment for the amount of resources that are going to be devoted to developing malware for that platform. It doesn't mean it's not happening. Obviously, it is happening. We're seeing it. It's just very slow. So, yeah, eventually, someday when we have a mobile phone that we just plug into a dock at work, and then everything we need to do for work comes up on that dock or on that phone, we keep our lives on the phone more so than we do now, and there really isn't much of a point of going after Windows users anymore. Then we'll probably see a big push toward the mobile side. But the other thing is that, like I mentioned, social engineering is a big aspect. Engineering is basically, for any if you don't know, tricking someone, scamming them, telling them one thing and it's actually so that's social engineering. Phishing attacks are all social engineering. Oh yeah, here's a document you have to open. It's about your new pay for next year or something like that. That's phishing. That's social engineering. And so we see a lot of that on the phone. I don't know about you, but I feel like over the last couple of years, the amount of scammers that have been calling me have just really increased significantly. You get a lot of these websites that you might visit on your mobile browser that'll have a pop-up, kind of what you see on the desktop side every once in a while, saying you need to, whatever, you're infected, you need to do this, you need to do that. So it's a lot of it takes advantage of what the criminals expect users to not know about. And that's just across the board, outside of just Android, but also on the Windows side and everything else. We see plenty of attacks that don't require immense sophistication when it comes to the technology behind it. It just requires the user falling for something and letting the bad guy in. And that's probably the primary way of attackers do things these days.
What are some best practices, and what are things that people should avoid when it comes to navigating the internet?
Well, I mean, there's the regular stuff you hear about. Be careful of what links you click on and what emails you open up. just having kind of a general air of I'm not sure I trust everything that I'm looking at is always a good idea, in my opinion. I try not to be a fear monger or tell people to just freak out, as they shouldn't, because honestly, I mean, a lot of attacks can easily be avoided by just simple education and being a little more aware of the potential of danger of something than just blindly clicking on stuff. The cyber criminals know this, and they do things like hijack, our friends and contacts systems in order to get to us, or they pretend to be something legitimate. They always do this kind of stuff, and so it's up to the users really at the end of the day to be more aware of that kind of stuff. If you see a link, hover over it, see where it's going. If someone asks you to download a file, who is this person? Why do they want you to download a file? Do you trust them? One method of spreading malware a few years back was this particular threat that would hijack Skype accounts and then send a message to every contact you had on Skype saying, LOL, is this you? And it just had a zip file on it, right? So assuming that you're anything like me, a little conceited, you're like, oh, is that me? I don't know if that's me or not. So I'm going to click it and open it because it's coming from someone I think I know. And then I get infected and the whole process starts over again.
It's crazy.
I mean, that was one of the simplest ones I've ever seen, but it was so effective.
Well, one time I tried to renew my antivirus. I don't know what company I was using. And I was phished because, I went to the website and all that. It looked fine and everything. I renewed it. And as soon as I put my credit card in and all that, my computer went crazy and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
So that was one that I was.
Oh, yeah. I got my identity stolen year before last, probably because of one of those many breaches. Like I said, I worked for the government before, so the OPM breach, I was in that, the Equifax thing, everything. And it sucks. Getting your identity stolen is really a pain. Some companies are cool about it. Like, for instance, they opened up a American Express card in my name and added like 3 iPhones to my Sprint account. And I got all that removed and shut down, no problem at all. And then one other bank, who I'm not going to say their name, is like, no, you owe us money. I'm like, this wasn't me. We don't believe you. And so it's just back and forth with them. I hope nobody else has to deal with that.
Yeah, that's terrible. So any other really interesting or surprising things you've learned? I mean, like, did you run across Stuxnet? That was around a few years ago, or anything else that's super interesting to you?
Yeah, I mean, state-sponsored malware like Stuxnet or Flame, things like that, I have worked on or poked at in the past. Usually that stuff it's always got so much more hype around it than what is the real concern. The concern about state-sponsored malware, in my opinion, is not that every person on the planet is going to get infected with it. Those things are designed specifically to attack a single target, or a group of targets. And it was developed so that it would evade the detection of the security products of those targets. So it's unlikely that a regular person is ever going to get hit with that. The thing to be concerned about, though, is that a lot of technology we see from APT, or Advanced Persistent Threat, state-sponsored malware, it does eventually make its way onto the consumer side. Take, for instance, the Eternal Blue exploits that we saw with WannaCry and NotPetya. These are exploits against Windows servers, basically, that allow malware to break in without having to physically. They just exploit this. I think it's a SMB vulnerability, and they're able to get onto the network, start infecting systems, spreading all around it with worm capabilities, using these same exploits to spread to the network and spread to other networks. I mean, you remember it was just pandemonium. I mean, the amount of WannaCry detections, it just exploded overnight, or over a few hours actually. So, but that technology we've seen with consumer-facing malware today. So there's Emotet, TrickBot. These are 2 very popular, very commonly seen information-stealing malware families that we've been dealing with, stopping a lot of over the last few months. And it's actually a big part of our report where we talk about Emotet and its capabilities. But it also has some of these exploits built into it. And we've seen other families that also have some of these exploits built into them, so that once they infect the system, they don't have to just hope that they can get what they need from that single system. They could start traversing the network. They could start, either brute forcing credentials or exploiting vulnerabilities to try and get throughout the network and make a bigger spread. Emotet in particular also is known for installing additional malware. So that's a big problem, right? And on the same token, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was going to ask you, actually, a thought just came to mind. Are you seeing anyone use AI in malware to make the malware adaptive and to learn and to dynamically change its code?
That's what I expect to see someday. I don't think that anytime, at least within the next 10 years, because I can't predict further than 10 years apparently, that we will not see AI deployed with the malware, but more so have an AI controlling and kind of command and control server in the background that's able to communicate with the malware, identify when a malware is being detected and how it's being detected, quickly roll out changes into a new generation of malware, and then distribute those malware all automatically, basically having the same capability of having a human who's actively trying to attack a network or just to distribute bad stuff, completely automated by AI. So that's where I see that going. AI itself would be too heavy to actually deploy it with the malware itself. So a lot of communication is going to be important when we get to that day.
Yeah, well, I know that people are working on edge computing, so AI can actually run on a device itself without having to communicate with the cloud very much. So, but as you said, we all learn, hackers learn, and criminals learn from all what we do, and we learn from them. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It's a cat and mouse that never stops. And I kind of like our outlook now. I would say if you go back maybe 4 or 5 years, then it looked pretty bleak. It seemed like the security industry was just unable to keep up with the constant threats that the bad guys are pushing out. And I mean, to be honest, the landscape over the last 10 years has drastically shifted. Like I said, there's more threats now than we ever have seen before, and more attention on them as well. If you go back to 2012 or 13, trying to inform a journalist or anybody else, hey, there's this threat out there that you should be worried about, it was like pulling teeth. They didn't care. Now it's now you have to beat them off with a stick, right? But that's the thing. Now security is taken more seriously. The technologies we have to combat malware are far more powerful than they have ever been. At least here at Malwarebytes, we've got a lot of stuff cooking as far as new detection technologies and kind of supersize or I guess making our existing detection technologies even more powerful than before. We're working a lot of development and testing of that kind of stuff, and hopefully over the next year we'll be able to roll out some of these new products and new functionalities that'll be able to combat not just the malware we're seeing right now, but tomorrow's malware and the next days. Because we got to watch out for it. That's at the end of the day, the bad guys see how we stop them. They're always going to have that upper hand on us. They'll always be able to just download our product and run a scan and see exactly what it was we hit on. Or tweak around enough to know what we hit on. So every time we're dealing with a new family or a new variant of a family of malware, then it's a high likelihood that malware has already been tested against all the security products it could find, like on Virus Total or something, but more of a black hat version that doesn't upload it to the internet. And
gotcha.
and so the like I said, they have that benefit. Sometimes they take it seriously, and sometimes we'll never see the same version of the same malware more than once. Other times they just don't care to the point where it's like, okay, well, we don't get detected by half of the vendors out there, so we're just going to distribute and see what happens. And a lot of times that's the case. You got this wide net being thrown. But one thing to point out real quick was along with the worm stuff, and when I was talking about before, we've actually seen an increase in malware on the business side and a decline on the consumer side over the last quarter. And that is an important distinction because most of it's for the last few years, it's mostly been consumer. Go after the wide net. See how many people you can infect, see how many people you can steal data from or use as a DDoS botnet or something like that, or ransom. But now we see more focus on these families and these tactics that we saw against consumers going against businesses. And the reasoning, in my theory anyway, is that because of, like I said, the Eternal Blue exploits, the NSA exploits, things like that, the kind of malware they're distributing. Businesses have better information to steal. They have more value of their information. So if you encrypt it and ransom it, you'll likely get paid. They usually, especially if you go after small businesses or medium-sized, oftentimes their IT staff or the security staff isn't really built out. And then finally, having network computers and being able to traverse through that network with your malware is way more damaging than just infecting a single grandma.
No, that's true. It's funny. I know it's probably not a good idea to even say it, but if you're a hardcore cyber criminal, you might as well have like a malware company and sell it for real because you're doing all this work to create it, and it's just a little bit more work to undo it. So you might as well work on both sides of the aisle, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of industry, I guess, the cybercrime world. The general consensus, or at least what a lot of people have studied and determined, is that the ages of cyber criminals is between like 16, 17, and like 22 to 24. After that, they usually go get real jobs. And they're just doing it for the learning experience, for the notoriety. That's not saying that every single cyber criminal out there is only doing it part-time. There's obviously some people who are devoted to it, but this is kind of the thing that benefits us in this cybersecurity community, is that, yeah, while they can see how we stop them, they don't learn from each other very well. Okay, so we'll see a lot of the same things happening over and over again. Encrypting ransomware actually did not just first show up in 2013. It's been around since 1989. One of the earliest, the AIDS virus. I don't know if you remember hearing about that, but that was ransomware. And yeah, and so the bad guys, they change tactics. They go back to old, tried and true things. Seeing so many banking trojans and information stealing malware today makes a lot of sense, because if you go back to before the days of ransomware, that's mainly what you saw. People trying to steal information in order to sell on the black market or something like that. And then we had ransomware, and then when ransomware died down, the Bitcoin, we started to see a rise in this type of malware, but then the value of Bitcoin shot everybody's plans. And for the next 6 months, we were dealing with just a flood of miners, but now we're getting back to where we were before. So, like I said, it's very cyclical. You always kind of see things come around again, and the bad guys will always go back to what's tried and true to work in the past, until some new attack type comes along. So one developer, or could come out with the next CryptoLock, or with the next Stuxnet, or whatever type of threat that may have it be generations above everything else we see. And then within the next few months, we'll start to see the copycats of that particular threat, as other bad guys either try to get their hands on that code, or they reverse engineer it and learn how to make it themselves. And then we start seeing, like I said, lots and lots of copycats. That always happens. Right. There's two certainties in the cybercrime world: low-hanging fruit and copycats.
Well, last thing I wanted to ask you, I forgot, the dark net or the dark web. I would think that you have to have a whole division that hangs out there and looks for stuff being sold, and all kinds of off-the-shelf malware and stuff like that being sold. I mean, what can you say about what you've seen there and what goes on there that people don't know about, maybe?
It's a marketplace like any other. If you went to a bodega or a swap meet or something like that, and you would see kind of a similar thing. You've got competitors. You've got, for instance, when a couple of years back we had the big names in ransomware were Locky and Cerber, and Cerber itself was kind of the king of ransomware for at least a year there, and it was a ransomware as a service. It allowed the whole affiliate model where they have their customers distribute the malware. They take a chunk of it, they get some cash, they reinvest that into the development of more powerful server ransomware, and then sell that, et cetera, et cetera. You've got a market share. If you're selling your ransomware and then some other guy's selling your ransomware, and there's basically the same thing, you've got to do something to differentiate yourself. The drive-by miners of was it CoinHive, that they're trying to mine these Monero coins through a script online. We see a bunch of these different companies, quote unquote companies, that are doing this and offering it to people to put on their website so they can, as an alternative to advertising, but also whatever. And some of these companies say, all right, well, we'll take 1% as a fee for helping you do this or whatever. Others say we have 0%, so it all comes down to who wants the resources, what functionality is needed, and what's better than what. So with this constant kind of, back and forth when it comes to at least the cybercrime underground right now, when it comes to the marketplace of trying to sell these kind of things or buy them, it's pretty, it's in flux a lot. And I mean, most of the stuff you see on there is kind of garbage anyway. It's just some cheap rats or, maybe an information stealing malware, but nothing that's so significantly advanced that it's going to completely change the world. So, yeah, I mean, being concerned about really dangerous types of malware coming from the darknet, we're ready for that kind of stuff. It's when governments create super sophisticated malware and then let the source code get leaked that we all are in trouble.
Makes sense, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
well, very good. So what's the best way for folks to find out more about Malwarebytes and, look at your products and try them out?
Sure. Well, like I said, we have consumer and enterprise products, so you could try either free trials and talk with some of our salespeople if you want. But just go to malwarebytes.com and you'll be able to find everything you need there. If you want some more information about our what we discover, what we search for, what we write about, blog.malwarebytes.com is our Malwarebytes Labs blog, and we post on that about all the kinds of stuff we find, everything from how to protect yourself to watch out for this new threat.
Okay,
but otherwise,
great.
yeah.
Well, Adam, I appreciate you coming. It's been an interesting podcast. Thank you.
No problem, Rich. Thanks a lot, man.
You have been listening to Almost Here, Around the Corner Future Technology podcast with Richard Jacobs. Subscribe to this podcast, post a review to discover more future technologies that are poised to transform our lives for better or worse, such as Bitcoin, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, blockchain, virtual reality, and more.